So, good morning everyone. Welcome to the lecture series of acid base and pH regulation. Now, in our last lecture, we had insight in depth about biomedical importance of the regulation of acid base and pH. We learned about basic chemistry related to acid, base, and buffers, how do buffer act. We also learned about Henderson-Hasselbalch equation and its application in clinically assessing the acid-base status of our body. Then we moved on to number of available mechanisms that regulate our body pH, namely three-tier system, your blood buffers or buffers of body fluid. Second one was respiratory mechanism. Third one was renal mechanism. Out of that, we learned about the first tier system, that was blood buffer system, which mainly consisted of bicarbonate buffer, phosphate buffer, and also it involved various intracellular buffers and intravascular buffers that are present in RBC, namely hemoglobin buffer and protein buffer in plasma. So continuing from that point, today we will learn about regulation of pH by other rest of the two mechanisms. First one is, out of which first one is respiratory regulation of pH and the second one is renal regulation of pH. So continuing, what is respiratory regulation of pH? We talked about three-tier system. Out of that respiratory system which regulates the pH, comes a second line of defense. To understand respiratory regulation, first of all, we must be aware that there is an existence of reversible equilibrium between carbon dioxide, gaseous carbon dioxide in the lungs, and bicarbonate ion in the plasma. You see here, your dissolved carbon dioxide, your gaseous carbon dioxide, which becomes dissolved, reacting with the water, forming carbonic acid, which ultimately breaks down into H ion and bicarbonate ion. So there is a reversible equilibrium at all the steps. So gaseous CO2 ultimately determines the bicarbonate concentration. So now if you see respiratory regulation of blood pH, it involves multiple components of which regulates pH. It involves the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer. It also involves your hemoglobin buffer system. Also involves your phosphate intracellular buffer system. And it also involves the carbamino compound formation. So basically what happens normally inside our body, the CO2 is generated via tissue metabolism. That CO2 needs to be transported in the blood in the dissolved form, and it needs to be taken to the lungs, where it must be again reconverted to gaseous CO2 and should be exhaled. So what happens here is, the CO2 generated out of tissue metabolism at the tissue level comes out of the tissue and diffuses into capillary. Now this CO2, majority of this CO2 is taken up by RBCs, and few molecules of CO2 also diffuse in the plasma. At what the place? It will react with the water. The enzyme is carbonic anhydrase and it will form carbonic acid. Immediately, carbonic acid will be spontaneously broken down into protons, H ions, and bicarbonate ions. Now, these generated H ion needs to be buffered immediately inside the RBC as well as in plasma. So, inside the RBC, these H ions are buffered by 2 or 3 mechanisms. First of all, it directly combines with oxygenated hemoglobin, where it helps to unload oxygen at the level of tissue, and tissue will get the oxygen against CO2, and your hemoglobin will buffer the H ion. So it will form reduced hemoglobin. Another mechanism to buffer CO2 directly, it combines with the reduced hemoglobin and forms carbamino compound. Carbamino compound, COO, directly combines with the N terminal of valine. Few of the H ions that has been generated will intracellularly be buffered by hydrogen phosphate, and itself will get converted to dihydrogen phosphate or sodium dihydrogen phosphate. So these two mechanisms will ensure that pH of the fluid is not falling abruptly. Okay. Again, in the plasma, generated H ions out of CO2 will combine with various plasma proteins, namely albumin, and it will be buffered by albumin. Also, your phosphate system minor will contribute to buffer H ion, but in a minimal. So these are the entire series of reaction occurs at the level of cells. Again, I must mention here, these HCO3 which has been generated diffuses out of RBCs. To maintain the electric neutrality, the chloride ion present in the plasma will diffuse inside of RBC along with water. So this entire series of events occur at the level of tissue, where oxygen has been delivered to the tissue from the RBC and CO2 has been taken up, where it produced H ions is got immediately buffered by hemoglobin and phosphate system inside RBC, as well as protein and phosphate system present in the plasma. Now, this entire thing is transported via blood, the dissolved CO2, and it will reach at lung. Now what happens in the lung? There is a release of CO2 from RBC and oxygenation of hemoglobin that takes place. So whichever the series of reaction we talk entirely exactly opposite of this series of events will occur at the level of lung. So what will happen at lung level? Your carbamino compound is carried carbon dioxide. First of all, the oxygen in the alveolus will diffuse inside the capillary, and this oxygen will combine with this reduced carbamino hemoglobin compound, and hemoglobin will become oxygenated. Also, this reduced hemoglobin will combine with O2 and release protons. Okay. Now this proton will combine with HCO3. Now where does HCO3 has come from? It has diffused from the plasma inside the RBC, and it will combine with proton to form carbonic acid. Now at the cellular level we talked about chloride shift. So at the lung level there will be reversal of chloride shift. Now here HCO3 will diffuse inside the RBC, and to maintain electrical neutrality your chloride will come out of RBC. Okay. Along with that water molecule will also. Now your liberated protons and bicarbonate combines to form carbonic acid. With the help of enzyme carbonic anhydrase, it gets converted into carbon dioxide and water. CO2 diffuses out of RBC into your alveolus, and this will be exhaled. Expiration, it will be exhaled out of our body. Similarly, what happens? Your phosphate buffer, which buffered the H ion at the level of tissue, and protein albumin, which buffered H ion at the level of tissue, will release the protons. Okay, and it combines with the bicarbonate ion present in the plasma to form H2CO3. It will liberate water and form CO2. This will also contribute to the CO2 in addition to CO2 released from RBC, and both of them, CO2 will come into alveolus, gains exchange of oxygen, and it will be liberated out of body via expiration. So you can see there are multiple buffer systems which is acting in the transport of CO2. Now, what happens when there is an addition of H ion or OH minus 1 ions into the body's fluid? So when there is excess H ion, it combines with the CO3, forms carbonic acid. Now what happens? This acid, it will immediately sensitize your chemoreceptor present in the brain. Now what happens? The brain will send the signal to the respiratory system, and what it will do is it will hyperventilate, and we know that out of H2CO3 CO2 is formed. So via hyperventilation body will try to exhale as much CO2 as possible, because the H ion got ultimately converted to H2CO3, which broken down into CO2 and water, and this CO2 will be exhaled. So this is a compensatory mechanism. Whenever the acidosis occurs, there is hyperventilation, which is a measure that CO2 which is generated out of H ion is out of our body. Conversely, when there is alkalosis, what happens? Your OH ion combines with the bicarbonic acid and forms H2O and bicarbonate. Okay. Now, this bicarbonate, which is accumulated, needs to be dealt with. What will happen? Respiratory system, it will do exactly opposite to that was seen in acidosis. Now, your dissolved CO2 must be more to neutralize your OH minus 1 generated due to alkalosis. So what will happen? Body will bring down the rate of respiration, and this measure will ensure that CO2 is retained. When the CO2 is retained, more CO2 is retained, more H2CO3 is formed, and more OH minus 1 ions are neutralized which is generated in alkalosis. So alkalosis produces hypohydration. So this is how your respiratory system tries to compensate and restore your body pH during abnormal conditions. So this was all about respiratory regulation of blood inflammation. Now we'll move on to the third tier system. Third system of 3-tier system in place for regulation of pH. That is your renal regulation of pH. Now it is the third line of defense. It is a major mechanism. It kind of brings solution of the problem in a permanent manner. Your blood vapor, they are temporary measures. They can act quickly but cannot act permanently. Additionally, they are supported by respiratory system, but the major system which deals with the problem permanently is the renal system. There are various major mechanisms which deals with the acid-base disturbances, that is namely excretion of ions via kidney, reabsorption of bicarbonate ions via NaH exchanger, excretion of titrable acid, formation of sodium dihydrogen phosphate, and excretion of ammonium ions. Ammonium ions takes the H ions and forms and gets excreted as ammonium ions. So the first mechanism is contributes to deal the disturbance in the excretion of H ions. It occurs in the proximal convoluted tubules of kidney. It ensures net excretion of H ions and also net generation of HCO3. Hence, this step ensures or decreases the alkali reserve. We'll see how. So your CO2 generated in your proximal convoluted tubule combines with water. The enzyme is carbonic anhydrase to form bicarbonic acid. Your carbonic acid breaks down immediately into your HCO3 and H ions. H ions are exchanged against sodium ions and be excreted inside the tubular lumen, and sodium and combines with bicarbonate ion to form sodium bicarbonate gas FCO. Now this step ensures alkali is recovered to the plasma. This is your alkali reserve. This system also helps this next mechanism, that is reabsorption of bicarbonate ions at the level of proximal convoluted tubule. Now what happens here, there is no net excretion of H ion from the tubule into the lumen, and there is no new generation of HCO3. This step only ensures that HCO3 that has been filtered from the glomeruli, they are not wasted, they are reabsorbed again. So this is how it happens. Your bicarbonate ions, sodium bicarb, filter from the glomerular filtrate. Your bicarbonate ion combines with the H ions that is secreted from the tubule to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid via carbonic anhydrase, we have two isoenzymes. This one that is present at the brush border level of proximal convoluted tubule is carbonic anhydrase 4, which converts carbonic acid into water and CO2. Now this CO2 diffuses inside the tubular cells. In addition, it receives CO2 from the cell also. It combines with water. Now the enzyme here acting inside the tubular cell is carbonic anhydrase 2. Now this will form carbonic acid. Here it is written as HCO3, but it is H2CO3. There is correction in this diagram. H2CO3 will immediately give H ions and produce HCO3. Now these H ions, we already talked, combines with HCO3. Now these H ions is exchanged against sodium ions, and this is NaH ATPase system requires help of ATP. Okay, so H1 is secreted, Na is reabsorbed. Now we have the net result is sodium entry inside the tubular cell, and bicarbonate which was present in the tubular fluid has been transferred to inside the cell. Now at the level of basolateral membrane, what happens? Your bicarbonate is transported in the blood in the ratio of 3 bicarbonate ions and 1 sodium ion will be transferred across the cell and will be absorbed in the blood. Okay. So this is how this mechanism ensures that HCO3 is reabsorbed. There is a reclamation of HCO3 which has been filtered from the glomerulus. Most of the HCO3 are reabsorbed again. Okay. So now moving on to third mechanism of regulation of pH by kidney, that is excretion of titrable acids. Now this mechanism ensures very large amount of H ions can be secreted from the tubules into the urine without much change in your urinary pH, and this occurs at distal convoluted tubule. This distal convoluted tubule ensures out of entire your microscopic structure of kidney. ECT ensures that maximal acidification of urine occurs at its limits. And this step is a measure of net acid excretion. So we'll see again at the distal tubular levels what happens. Your CO2 and water in presence of carbonic anhydrase forms H2CO3. Now this out of this H2CO3 your H ion is secreted from the tubule into the lumen, and this H ion, whatever the H ion has been generated, this H ion combines with disodium hydrogen phosphate buffer, and it is taken up by this buffer and it forms sodium dihydrogen phosphate, and the sodium has been transferred against H ion inside the tubule, and this sodium ion combines with the bicarbonate to form, and it will be exchanged towards the capillary lumen and will be absorbed in the blood. Okay, so the additional H ions that are secreted from the tubules, it goes into urine, and this is how your tubule excretes your H ions. So now this H ions is buffered by your phosphate system. So this buffer system ensures that there is no abrupt rise in urinary pH which might damage the tubular or renal tissue. So this is your titrable acid that has been formed and it will be excreted via urine. And the fourth mechanism which ensures the maintenance of body pH is excretion of ammonium ion, NH4 plus S NH4Cl. So this mechanism ensures it excretes up to 400 milliequivalent per day of H ion you can trap H ions with ammonia as NH4 ions or ammonium ions without much change in the king. Your H ion is not getting directly secreted into the tubular fluid, ultimately in urine. It is excreted as NH4 ion or NH4Cl. These also operate at the level of distal convoluted tubule. Now, what is the source of this ammonia at distal convoluted tubules? If you remember, in urea cycle, we talked about glutaminase enzyme that is present. After glutamate or glutamine was transferred to liver, the glutaminase got your ammonia out of glutamine, and your ammonia ultimately entered into the mitochondria of liver. During that time, we also talked about two types of glutaminase. One was in liver and another was in kidney. Now, this renal type of glutaminase, it provides ammonia. Now, use of this ammonia is to buffer additional H ions and excrete it as a NH4Cl in urine. As glutamine is present in the liver, it ensures the ammonia is delivered to the ammonia is generated from the transport form of ammonia, that is glutamine and glutamate in the liver mitochondria. Now, this activity of these renal type of glutamate increases in acidosis, obviously, to buffer H as NH4Cl. So, previously discussed titrable acidity and ammonia content, both, sum total of both of this mechanism will be the measure of acid excretion from our body. We will see how your ammonia helps in excretion of H ions. So, in tubular cell, glutamine, in the presence of glutaminase, will be converted to ammonia and H ion. Again, it will form glutamate. Glutamate and the glutamate dehydrogenase reaction will form ammonia and H ion, and ultimately forms alpha ketoglutarate. Now, the H ions released here, they are used up in your gluconeogenesis process. Okay. And the H ion from your lumen capillary enters into the tubular cells, and this H ion is immediately joining with ammonia to form ammonium ion. Now, once the ammonium ion is formed, this ammonium, since it is charged molecule, it cannot re-diffuse inside the tubular cell. Okay? Now, this ammonium ion combined with Cl to form ammonium chloride, and hence your H ions which are present in the blood due to acidosis, they are excreted as NH4Cl. Always remember, for every H ion that has come out from the cells in the tubular lumen, your sodium will be reused. So, this is how your H ion is excreted via ammonium ion or NH4Cl. So, these four mechanisms by kidney ensures that your acid is excreted out of your body and the pH of the body is maintained. The four mechanisms were reabsorption of HCO3, SEG, sodium hydrogen ion exchanger system at proximal convoluted tubule, excretion of titrable acid in distal convoluted tubules, and the role of excretion of H ion as ammonium ion or NH4Cl at the level of distal convoluted tubules. So, this is how your respiratory and renal system contributes to maintenance of your body pH. Now, which are the disturbances in the pH balance that can be observed inside our body? They are mainly two. We know the normal pH of body 7.35 to 7.45 with a mean resting at 7.4. When it is called acidosis, first of all, acidemia. What is acidemia? When your blood pH is less than 7.35. And what is acidosis? The process which contributes to this acidemia is known as acidosis. So blood pH less than 7.35. It is life-threatening if the pH falls beyond 7.25. The clinical signs and symptoms in acidosis are CNS depression and coma, and death occurs if pH falls below 7. So below 7 the life is incompatible. Conversely, we also have alkalemia, where the blood pH rises more than 7.45. The process which leads to this alkalemia is known as alkalosis. It is dangerous if the pH rises beyond 7.55, since alkalosis leads to more electronegativity of your plasma proteins. What will happen? Your ionized calcium will remain bound to those proteins. So there is net deficiency of your ionized calcium, and it will lead to tetany, that we have already seen in your calcium, that you will see low in your calcium metabolism. Also, decreased ionized calcium or calcium will lead to neuromuscular hyperexcitability, that is observed in tetany. If pH extends beyond 7.60, there are more probable chances of death. So it is incompatible. pH within 7.6 incompatible with life. So this is your basic disorders that are observed in body due to alteration in body pH. Now, to understand these things, you also need to know the normal ranges of various blood gas parameters that are assessed to know the acid-base status of a particular person. So, normal body pH 7.35 to 7.45. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 35 to 48 millimeter of mercury. Partial pressure of oxygen inside our body 83 to 108 millimeter of mercury. Plasma bicarbonate ion concentration 22 to 33 millimole per liter. Saturation of oxygen is usually around 94 to 98 at room air. All these parameters, they are measured on arterial blood gas analyzer machine that is available in our clinical biochemistry laboratory. So, via arterial blood gas measurement, individual will be able to know, based on which are the result of all these parameters, we will come to know the acid-base status of a particular individual. This is a photo of arterial blood gas analyzer machine, where your blood sample is put here. Here the various reagent, it ultimately gives you the result of the parameters we discussed just now: pH, PO2, CO2, SO2, SCO3 ions, etc. Now, you should also know that arterial blood gas sample should be, how arterial blood gas sample should be obtained from the patient which is there in ICU, and how it should be transported to the clinical biochemistry laboratory. So, remember, the choice of specimen for arterial blood gas analysis is whole blood. Most commonly it is arterial blood that you have to collect. At times when arterial blood is difficult, you can also collect venous blood. But the choice is whole arterial blood. Now you collect the blood with an anticoagulation. Anticoagulant used here is heparinized or heparin. You should use as anticoagulant. And you must ensure that it should be collected under anaerobic conditions. We discuss various issues if you do not maintain your anaerobic conditions. It can affect your parameters of arterial blood gas. Transport of sample is also a crucial point in arterial blood gas analysis. ABG parameter values will be affected if they are not transported properly. So they should be put on ice pack or they should be immersed in ice water slurry if there is any type of delay is expected in analysis of arterial blood gas sample. The guideline says as soon as the blood is collected, immediately it should be analyzed on ABG machine. But if there is some kind of expected delay, you must put it on ice water slurry or ice pack. Your blood sample is received. Now, why we should maintain anaerobic condition once you collect the blood from artery? Now, you all must be aware that partial pressure of carbon dioxide in atmosphere is less compared to PCO2 of arterial blood. So, what happens? Your PCO2 will tend to diffuse from the blood into the external environment. So, what happens? PCO2 concentration will be low, estimated in the blood sample. Similarly, when PCO2 is low, it will also have effect on your blood pH. Your blood pH will rise. Okay. And if you talk in terms of partial pressure of oxygen, we all are aware that your partial pressure of oxygen is more in the room air compared to your arterial blood samples. So what happens if you do not maintain anaerobic condition? Your PCO2 from the room air will diffuse into your blood and it will falsely elevate your PO2 levels. Now the second thing you have to consider is the transport of your ABG sample. You have to ensure that it is transported immediately and analyzed. Once it is collected, immediately it should be analyzed. If there is delay, it should be put on ice pack or ice water slurry. Now, why this has to be ensured? Because what happens? The whole blood contains WBC, platelets, and reticulocytes, and also RBCs. So, what will happen? Your glycolysis will operate inside this cell, and what will happen? It will consume glucose and RBC. It will liberate lactic acid. Now this lactate will lead to fall in your pH because this lactate is added in your blood. It is a fixed acid, so it will decrease in your pH. So this has to be ensured that your glycolysis is inhibited and your ice pack or ice water slurry temporarily halts your glycolysis, thereby it decreases the lactate concentration. Also inside WBC, PO2 is also consumed once the glucose is metabolized. So your PO2 will also fall since WBC contains mitochondria, so it will further metabolize glucose into mitochondria. In order to metabolize glucose, it will also consume PO2 from the blood, so that PO2 will also fall. So what are the expected changes? Then there is a delay in ABG sample analysis. PO2 might fall. Your pH might also fall due to generation of lactic acid. So in order to avoid all these, you have to take your sample into ice pack or ice water slurry. Again, we all know that glucose metabolism ultimately inside mitochondria produces CO2. So cellular respiration consumes oxygen and produces CO2. So your partial pressure of O2 will fall down and CO2 will rise if you do not properly transport your sample. So I think with this I will stop here. So today we learnt about if you summarize the whole lecture, today we learnt about the mechanisms other than blood buffers, mainly your respiratory system and your renal system. How do they ensure that normal body pH is maintained? We also learned about what are the various disturbances, acidosis and alkalosis, and when it happens, and what impact does it carry when it is not controlled. We also learned how ABG or arterial blood gas is analyzed from the patient's blood in the clinical biochemistry laboratory, and from that we can know the acid-base status of a particular person. We also discussed about how the ABG sample should be collected, which precautions should be maintained while collecting the samples in the artery, and also which precautions should be taken while transport of that particular sample into the biochemistry laboratory. Thank you everyone.